The Dragon type is widely regarded as one of the best typing of monsters that a Yu-Gi-Oh card can have, specifically Dark Dragon. However, in this video I'm going over some of the worst dragons that have ever been put into the game. And at number 10, we have the Blue Eyes Shining Dragon. This card shares its stats and attribute with the Blue Eyes White Dragon, being light with 3000 attack and 2500 defense. It's 2 levels higher than the Blue Eyes at level 10, and it must be special summoned by tributing the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon. Shining Dragon's effects are that it gains 300 attack for each dragon monster in your graveyard, and it can also negate any effect that targets it, and that effect is not once per turn. Now, while this card does have an extremely powerful effect for the year it came out, in 2004, it was actually impossible to summon this card all the way until 4 years later. Konami wouldn't release the monster it needed to tribute, the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon, until 2008. At the very least, when it came out, pretty much the only reliable way to cheat Ultimate Dragon out, Future Fusion, existed already, even if it got limited soon after release. However, by 2008, this slow gimmick strategy already had no room in the meta. That was the time where Dark Arm Dragon had a tight grip on the game, being a tier 0 threat throughout the whole year. After Dad was taken care of, monsters with similar targeting protection to Blue Eye Shining Dragon did rise up to eventually be part of the metagame, but they were 1,000 times easier to bring out, while only being slightly weaker. Also, since this card negates the effects that target it and not activations, it cannot be activated in the damage step, so it can't even protect itself when attacking into a Man-Eater Bug, or pre-errata Ryoko unlike other cards. Still, it benefits from being a Blue Eyes card, one of the most widely supported archetypes in the game. They've also released many more ways to cheat out the Blue Eyes Ultimate Dragon as the years went by, so that is why this card occupies only the 10th spot on this list. And at number 9, we have Sniffer Dragon. This is a level 2 Dark Dragon with tiny stats at 800 attack and 400 defense. Sniffer Dragon's effect is, when it's normal or special summoned, it can add another copy of itself from your deck to your hand on a hard once per turn. Dragon decks in Yu-Gi-Oh have often had the fame of having some of the most powerful starters in the game. From Rocket Tracer being able to get you a level 8 Synchro, and Safer to getting you a Spheres at the very least, Sniffer Dragon just pales in comparison to pretty much any dragon card that actually sees play in Dragon Link. Its effect is one of the most meaningless +1s you can get in the game. Adding a copy of itself with no benefits to having multiple copies, or any special summon condition, isn't going to do much more than serve as discard fodder. This could have been fine if it was an old card, but Sniffer Dragon was actually released at the beginning of the Link era, in this same set that introduced the Rocket monsters into the game nonetheless. However, it is interesting to note that a very similar card to this would actually see playing in Dragon Rulers of all things back in the day. Poke Draco has pretty much the same effect as this card, on an even smaller body, but it being Fire attribute was relevant for being a non-tuner for Blaster to Search after the baby dragons were all banned. And at number 8, we have Chobham Armor Dragon. This monster is level 1 with 0 attack and defense and the following effects. When your opponent declares a direct attack, you can special summon an attack position, and then, for this turn only, it cannot be destroyed by battle, and any damage you take from battles involving this monster is halved. Also, when it's sent to the graveyard as a link material, you can return another dark monster in your graveyard to your hand, but your opponent can get back one monster from their graveyard too. Chobham packs 2 incredibly mediocre effects. When it comes to the first one, this card is pretty much just a straight downgrade from Battle Fader, since it doesn't end the battle phase, negate the attack, or even do anything if it gets removed. It's much worse than all the other battle-related hand traps that ever managed to actually see play. Now, as for the effect it gets when it's used as a link material, it's not that bad in theory. It is easily linked off with either Pitsy or Striker Dragon, but it does require graveyard setup to be used effectively. It doesn't help that every good dragon extender is a hard once per turn, making it unlikely you'll be able to use it again during that turn. The worst part though is how it lets your opponent return any monster from their graveyard to their hand. Not only are most of the hand traps in the game monsters, a fair amount of them can be used however many times you want per turn, giving that effect the potential to be given back to your opponent to answer whatever threat you were going to do with it anyway. And at number 7, we have Flamvell Dragnov. This is a level 2 fire dragon with 1100 attack, and it has the effect that, when it's destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, your opponent takes 500 damage. Dragnov also has a graveyard effect that lets you banish it from the graveyard and a face-up fire monster to add another copy of itself from your hand to your deck. Of all the incredibly mediocre Flamvell cards with burn effects, this is the most minor of them all. Much older cards were doing this amount of damage while also floating at the same time. The fact that this card can only add itself with its graveyard effect is disappointing, since there have actually been multiple Flamvell cards that were actually decent enough to see play, such as Flamvell Firedog and Flamvell Guard. But even if this card could just add any of the archetype's members from the deck to the hand, odds are it would still be on this list anyway. The cost of banishing a face-up fire monster you control for a search is such a major loss of card advantage and tempo. This huge cost also has anti-synergy with its very own archetype. The main reason to run the Flamvell Dog package back in the day was because of the card Rekindling. Rekindling lets you special summon as many fire monsters with 200 defense from your graveyard as possible. This card was the closest the game had to a Soul Charge back in the day, and it even ended up on the ban list for some amount of time. But despite having the so desired stat line for 200 defense, if you do end up using Flamvell Dragnov's effect, he'll just rob you of 2 monsters to bring back with it. And at number 6, we've got Kiryu. Kiryu is a level 5 Dark Dragon Union monster with 2000 attack and 1500 defense. It has the unusual Union effect of being able to equip himself to a monster or unequip to special summon itself once per turn. While equipped, Kiryu gives a 900 attack and defense bonus, and it can also attribute itself to allow the monster to attack directly this turn. And as if that all didn't sound unimpressive enough, Kiryu can only be equipped to Dark Blade, an 1800 vanilla beater who was outclassed even when it came out. Union monsters have been known to be quite bad outside of the ABC archetype, but Kiryu manages to be the worst of all Union dragons by a long shot. Its effect was outclassed by every half-decent equip spell back in the day, and it also needs a tribute to be brought out due to being level 5. Even with modern support, there's no good way to bring this out if you wanted to for whatever reason. Most new Union cards focus entirely on light machine monsters, and pretty much the only Union dragon monster to ever see play was Tiragon during Dragon Ruler format. Purely due to being a level 3 monster with 500 attack that can be brought back with Debris Dragon for level 7 synchro plays. But still, even if Tiragon was only ever used for its level and stats, that's more than anyone could ever say about Kiryu. And at number 5, we have Baby Tiragon. This is an Xyz Earth Dragon that's rank 1 and requires 3 level 1 monsters as materials. Baby Tiragon's effect lets you detach an Xyz material during your main phase 1 to make one of your level 1 monsters be able to attack directly this turn. The amount of resources this card asks you to sink into it to actually get its effect off is simply absurd. Not only is it asking for 3 level 1 monsters on the field, which isn't a very easy task by itself, you also need a 4th level 1 monster to actually use that direct attack. For that to be worth anything in the first place, the 4th monster would either need to have a massive attack stat, or a really good effect when it inflicts battle damage. So we're looking at a 4 monster investment, one of which has to be a somewhat specific one to get a payoff weaker than just linking them off for a good link 4. Baby Tiragon was one of the first Xyz monsters to be released, but even then it was outclassed by Xyz era staples which came in the same set, such as Zenmaines and Dulka. In fact, the set also had another rank 1 Xyz, which would be better than Baby Tiragon in pretty much any situation. Number 83, Galaxy Queen. In the current metagame, Xyz monsters with the effects that let you attack directly are valuable and actually see tons of play to easily go into Zeus to wipe the field. But sadly, since Baby Tiragon can't use its effect on itself, it can't even be useful for that much. And at number 4, we have Poly-Chemicritter Hydragon. This card is a level 8 water Gemini monster with 2800 defense and 200 attack. Hydragon has the regular Gemini effect where it's treated as a normal monster on the field or in the graveyard, and it can then be normal summoned again while it's already on the field to gain its effect. Its first effect is when another Gemini monster is normal summoned, you can make that monster gain 500 attack and defense permanently. His second effect is that if a Gemini monster you control would be destroyed by a card effect, you can destroy one other card from your field instead. Gemini monsters have always been known to be the worst kind of main deck monsters. This is how they can get away with having so many strong support cards. But even with being able to cheat this card out without too much difficulty, there's just no reason to run this over any other high-level Geminis. Within its own archetype, it's outclassed by Poly-Chemicritter Dioxogre, who can impact the field more with a pop and a huge attack stat. Outside of that, Phoenix Gearfree can provide graveyard recursion and a spell and trap card negate. Hydragon just sits on the field, giving you minor stat buffs and some protection, but only if you manage to bring it out alongside other actually impactful monsters. In the history of the meta, Geminis have only really seen play a handful of times, either due to having crazy recursion effects in the early synchro format, or a really good fortunate combination of level, archetype, and attribute to be used alongside Gemini Spark. Not only does Hydragon not have either of these, he was also released years after they were relevant as well. And at number 3, we have Divine Dragon Excelion. This is a light dragon level 5 monster with 1500 attack and 900 defense. When Excelion is normal summoned, you can choose to gain one effect for each other copy of Divine Dragon Excelion in the graveyard, and you can't make it gain the same effect twice. These effects are, this card gains 1000 attack, another attack if it destroys an opponent's monster by battle, and to burn your opponent for the same amount of attack the monster had if it beats over something. Excelion came out in the same set that introduced the gimmick of needing multiple copies of the same card to gain additional effects, but it got the worst effect out of all of them, and these monsters weren't good in the first place. It only gains its buff exactly when normal summoned, so you won't be benefiting from dumping extra Excelions in the graveyard after it's out. It will also forget its effect if it leaves the field temporarily, or gets flipped face down and then back up. All of this on a monster that needs to be tributed to be brought out in the first place. Cards which only work with more copies of themselves would eventually be meta, and some would even land on the ban list. But these effects all gained you advantage somehow. Even for the time this card was released, when tribute summons were actually a premium and seen play because of the Treeborn Frog, Excelion was one of the worst things you could use your normal summon for. There's just never any reason to play this card over something like Zaborg the Thunder Monarch or even Jinzo. Even being a dragon card does this card no favors, as it's too high level to be used for either the Dragon Link ones as well. And at number 2, we have Diabolos, King of the Abyss. Diabolos is a level 7 Dark Dragon, so it needs 2 tributes to be tribute summoned, with 2800 attack and 1000 defense. This monster cannot be special summoned, and when it's tribute summoned, both tributes must be dark. It has the effect that, before your opponent draws a card for turn, you can look at the card at the top of their deck and decide if you want to keep it there or put it on the bottom of their deck so they draw another random card. There's just a huge gap between how difficult this card is to bring off and the payoff you'd actually get for doing so. 2 tribute monsters that cannot be special summoned have always been quite hard to summon, but they did actually see some play. Light and Darkness Dragon was relevant for years, and Vanity's Ruler still sees play to this day. The thing is that these cards provided absurd payoffs if you do get their summons off, with Vanities logging out special summons completely, and Light and Darkness Dragon being able to negate 4 effects and being a monster reborn if it gets destroyed. Diabolos, while being even harder to get out since it requires Dark Tribute specifically, gives you a very weak effect that makes your opponent draw a mediocre card for turn. This kind of effect was only ever used in Mystic Mind stall decks, who'd be unable to summon it anyways. These decks also have access to the much better Goddess Scold Oracle instead, which just requires you to activate it from your hand and lets you look at the top 3 cards from your opponent's deck and put them in any order instead. But at the very least, Diabolos did get 2 retrains over the years, which were good and widely used in some strategies, with Darkest Diabolos and Light Ray Diabolos. But the original itself is completely worthless, and that's why it gets the second spot on this list. And at number 1, we have Jormungardr the Nordic Serpent. This is a level 8 Dark Dragon monster with 3000 attack and defense, and is one of the lesser known monsters of the Nordic archetype. This card cannot be normal summoned or set, it must be special summoned from your hand to your opponent's side of the field in defense position, while an Azure monster is on the field. Jormungardr destroys itself if there's no Azure on the field, and also the first time it's changed from defense position to attack position while it's on the field, its controller takes 3000 damage. So, first of all, the issue with this card is that it needs an Azure monster in the field to be brought out and stay on the field in the first place. The Azure are the boss monsters of the Nordic archetype, and they're all level 10 synchros that each require one specific Nordic subtype of tuner plus 2 or more non-tuners. These have always been some of the most restrictive synchros to be brought out, and even with the new support, you still need to invest quite a few cards to make them in the first place. And if you do manage to do that, you can summon this huge level 8 beater to your opponent's side of the field. Now, monsters that are summoned from your hand to your opponent's field have seen play regularly, but usually they do so while removing your opponent's monsters at the same time, like Kaijus or Lava Golem, while Jormungardr just gives your opponent a body for free. Of the monsters that weren't being used as removal, they at least had effects to floodgate your opponent until you got rid of them, like Nightmare Corruptor Eebly locking them into only Link monsters. What does this huge beater do to your opponent once you give it to them? Well, it inflicts some chunk of burn damage to them if they decide to change it into attack position, something your opponent is not forced to do. This card has absolutely nothing to do or any synergy with its other archetype members and left Nordic fans baffled when it came out. With the exception of Fenrir, the Nordic Wolf, who came out in the same wave of support as Jormungardr, Fenrir has the same summoning condition as the Snake, where it's special summoned to your opponent's side of the field if there's an Azure out, with even bigger stats, and has the effect to change all monsters of its controllers from defense position to attack position at the start of the battle phase. So, this is the ultimate payoff for this 2-card combo, which makes your opponent go +4. You get to inflict 3000 burn damage, and that's if they don't use them off as material and choose to enter the battle phase in the first place, which they don't even have to. To make matters even worse, Fenrir itself can only be summoned during the main phase too, so you can't even pull this combo off on your first turn. Not that you'd ever want to do so at any point in the game. The other monsters on this list so far have ranged from weak to mediocre, but none of them had effects that benefited your opponent over you so much. Jormungardr easily earns its first spot on this list, as it's the worst dragon monster by far. Alright, and that's the list. If you think there's any other terrible dragons that should have been on this list, or if you have ideas for future videos just like this one, I'd love to hear about those things down in the comments.